Hi sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name is Beth. If you're new, welcome. Here's the beautiful quilt that we're working on today called Pretty Posies, and there will be a pattern in my Etsy shop. It begins with a square for the center and 2 squares that will be cut in half diagonally. There are also 3 templates that we'll need because we need to do a little bit of applique. These are the colors that I chose to work on my quilt, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that quarter circle shape using my template. I used my rotary blade and I just eyeballed that seam allowance, a pretty generous seam allowance for this first one. I would recommend you probably just do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I think this one was a little big. I went back and trimmed a little bit away, but it was a really quick way to cut that fabric. But I did have to go back and trim a little bit just so I wouldn't have as much bulk inside. For this pretty block, I need 4 of these quarter circles, and I pressed those edges in using a cardboard template. I put those quarter circles in the corners of my square, my first square that's sort of a soft yellow or tan, and then I took the larger squares and I'm going to cut them in half diagonally. This is the strip that I'm going to be using for my posy flower stem, and it's a 1-inch wide strip, and I'm going to use a basting stitch that I'll be removing later. This is my favorite way to make stems for applique. You just fold that strip into thirds, making sure all the raw edges are sort of inside, not hanging over the edge. And I use a basting stitch, and then after it's appliqued, I just pull out those stitches. I'm cutting my little stems about 2.5 inches long, and I'm going to put them on those white triangles before I sew my block together. In the pattern, I mentioned you should probably put the triangles with your center square now, but in the video here, I am first making my little posy flowers using the circle, and I'm sort of making a yo-yo type applique circle, just cutting around that circle using a generous seam allowance because I'm going to take a needle and thread and put a running stitch in there, pull it tight, press, and then I will have a small round flower to put on my quilt block. I continued getting my applique pieces ready before I put my block together, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'll make the leaves for my flower, and I'm using a pencil to trace around the template for the leaf, and I'm putting this on lightweight interfacing on the smooth side of the interfacing. This is a fusible interfacing, but you wouldn't need to use fusible. It's just the interfacing that I happen to have right now, and I'm leaving an area for a seam allowance. I'm going to be cutting these out, leaving excess around the outside of that leaf, and I'll show you in just a minute how I attach it to the fabric. Here's a strip 2.5 inches left over from my last quilt, and I'm putting that interfacing on the right side, and then I'm going to stitch right on top of that pencil line all the way around. After stitching around my leaf, I trimmed away a little bit of the excess, leaving a little seam allowance and then doing some little snips around those curved edges. And then I'm going to put a hole in the center of my interfacing with a pair of scissors, and I'll be turning my leaf right side out. Now all I need to do is poke out those corners to make a perfect leaf, and all of my leaves will be exactly the same size. Now it's time to put those triangles onto my block. So I'm just pinning those quarter circles in place. Nothing has been appliqued yet. I want to hand applique all of these elements, but first I'm going to put my quilt block together. You could applique those quarter circles now, but I wanted to have everything ready so I wouldn't have to go back and forth to my machine. And so I'll pin those in place, and then I will add the triangles and then pin the rest of my applique pieces in place before I sit down for some nice quiet stitching in the evening. Here I am pointing my stems the opposite direction so that when I put my triangles on, those stems will be enclosed in the seam, and I can then turn them the other direction so that they're going the right way. I'm going to choose some thread that goes with my applique pieces so that I can have some quiet stitching, and everything I will need will be very close at hand. I want to thank one of my YouTube friends here in my sewing room for recommending this quilt block. It was a fun one to figure out and put together, and it's making such a beautiful quilt. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.